Do you have a today in history?
I do.
Cool.
Wow, prepared.
Okay, all right. All right. I show up week in and week out. I'm getting heckled here by the sideline reporter.
I'm just messing with you.
This is all staying in.
All right, well, in that case, it's episode 123. This is a podcast. Things are dead. I'm Mike. That's Gavin. Fia also showed up. How you guys doing?
Hey.
We're good. At least, I'm good. I don't want to speak for Fia, but yeah, I'm pretty good.
Yeah, I'm doing okay.
Great. Glad you guys are doing well.
How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Good.
And I'm trying to think here when the last time we recorded was. But yeah, I think the last time we recorded, we were talking about how I had a whole lot of work to do to get ready for the Israel and Hamas situation. And let me tell you
how'd that go?
It's been a whole lot of work for the last 2 weeks straight, every day, making sure I'm up to date on what's going on there.
I bet.
Dang.
It's been nuts. Good news is, got a wedding this weekend. Very happy about that.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a wild October, wild month.
Wild month.
Wild month, October. Can confirm.
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
Even just in my own personal life.
Yep.
The house stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was talking with Fia before Mike hopped on, and we bought a house successfully.
Woohoo.
I don't know how that's possible.
Neither do I, to be honest. Like if you would ask me, like, hey, how do you go about buying a house? I would have absolutely no idea. You contact a real estate agent, and then you sign a whole bunch of paperwork, and then they give you the keys to a house that you don't own, but the bank owns, and you make payments on it for 30 years until you own it. That's pretty much how it works.
Well, I mean, when you put it like that.
Also, in the past couple weeks, we thought we had until December 1st in this current apartment. And spoilers, I mentioned last episode that I might be recording this from the new house. Mike thought that was very optimistic, and he was right. So we thought we had until December 1st, and then our landlord found somebody else to take over the lease starting November 1st, and was kind of like, is this okay? But mostly being like, hey, this is happening. So it's nice that we don't have to pay an extra month rent to our landlord.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we would have liked to have had time to paint some of the rooms without having all of our stuff in there. Longer term, we wanted to, or even in this, month that we thought we wanted to rip up some of the carpet because there's this nice hardwood floor underneath. But you have to like chip off all the glue that they used to like glue down the carpet and sand the hardwood and stuff. So it was like, it wasn't going to be a lot of effort, but it was going to be a process. And now we just don't have time for that. So, yeah. Anyway, we do own a house now, but one that is absolutely still livable, but maybe we don't have as much time to sort of customize it like we wanted. But all things considered, I'm a millennial who just bought a house. I'm breaking all sorts of stereotypes and rules, and yeah.
I mean, this is what happens. I think this can be a lesson to a lot of people here. Gavin doesn't eat any avocado toast. Gavin's not going out. He makes that coffee at home and saves all that money. And he's able to buy a house.
That is actually true. I even make my own beard oil at home.
Wow.
Right, well, that's not. I haven't heard that one before. So
beard oil is really expensive. My bespoke beard oil. But yeah, so we're going to get into this episode. We're going to be talking about something else that interesting and important that happened to me recently, which was this past week from like Tuesday night until about noon on Saturday. I was at the conference, the annual conference of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, where I presented my master's thesis as a talk. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to present research at a conference, and Fia's going to chime in a little bit because she's also done that. And then I'm going to talk about just some brief highlights of some cool talks and things that I went to while I was there, neat paleontology stuff. that other folks are working on. But first, Fia, can you hit us with the housekeeping?
Yes, I got you guys. So I know it's been a while, but don't forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to. And to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to give us feedback about the show and any future topics you would like to hear on the podcast. And if you would like to be a guest on the show, be sure to fill out our guest form. All of that can be found in the show notes. And so, Gavin, do you know what next episode topic is going to be?
I sure don't. My instinct is to go with a group of lizards, but I don't know how good of a fossil record this particular group has, so I'm going to look more into that, and so it might be about some lizards, or it could be about something totally different. Yeah. So there we go. As somebody's dinner done, or
I mean, I wasn't going to mention that, but yeah, I'm air frying some chicken that needed to be made. Yeah, and that's so at some point I'm going to have to take care of that. But in the meantime, I got it today in history if you guys want it.
I sure
yeah,
do.
We're ready.
All right, so 1978. As I'm looking at this, I had one thing picked. We're going to get to that one thing, but I want to talk about the two other things, mostly because I think they're funny.
Cool.
So a couple things happened in 1978. Number one, Gaylord Perry wins the National League Cy Young Award. Why is that funny? Because the dude's name is Gaylord Perry.
Mike.
Yeah. Number two, 1978. Israeli government improves in-principle draft on compromise peace. Tell you what.
That turned out well.
Yeah, that's like a dark kind of funny. Like the bad kind of funny. And then the thing that I originally saw here, in 1978, the movie Halloween, directed by John Carpenter, starring Jamie Lee Curtis, was released. I've never seen Halloween. I've heard good things about it.
Oh yeah, I guess this is like technically the closest thing to a Halloween episode we have. So
it's our spooktacular.
Yeah, Halloween.
Yeah, presenting at conferences, very scary. As we'll talk about.
I can only imagine.
Definitely intentional. This topic at this time, yeah, definitely on purpose.
Well, in that case, let's get right into it. Gavin, talk to us about this conference.
Wait,
Michael.
What?
Fia's here.
I'm here.
Wait, did we officially change this over? Are we not? Are we? Is it still Swamp Corner? Is it the other thing?
No, we are debuting the Seagrass Corner.
Seagrass Corner.
Seagrass Corner.
Yes.
Fia,
go ahead. Out of the swamp and into the seagrass prairie.
Fia, you try and have as good of a transition as I just tried to have. Go for it.
So, this is Seagrass Corner. We're going to be talking about all things seagrass, seagrass ecology, the animals that live there, and really whatever I come across in my daily, weekly research. So I'm going to start off Seagrass Corner by introducing one of my main seagrass I will be looking at during my PhD, and that is turtle grass, which is Thalassia testutinum. Any guesses what eats this grass?
Manatees.
No, that's manatee grass.
See, I'm already learning. I knew manatees ate grass. I didn't know there was like a difference. That's cool.
Yes, well, I'll do manatee grass next time.
All right.
So, like the name says, it's turtle grass, so the turtles eat them. But yeah, they're a marine seagrass. They form meadows in sandy or muddy bottoms in the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico. This species is a slow-growing and one of the thicker strand seagrasses. So, like their leaves are wider than some of the other ones, like the manatee grass. And they're characterized by having higher resilience to stress, so they can handle more of the like stressors from storms and other weather events because they have like more biomass underground. They have more root structure, but because they take so long to grow, they have a low recovery or ability to grow back compared to other seagrasses. So there's kind of like a a cost benefit thing of they can handle stress really well, but once they get ripped out, it takes a long time for those seagrass to recover.
Okay.
And yeah, they form really, really wide, spread out, thick, luscious meadows of grass underwater, and that provides habitat and important feeding grounds for a lot of organisms.
Neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, seagrass is always something that I enjoy learning about. We talked about it a decent amount when I went to Belize back in
Mm-hmm.
undergrad,
Yeah.
but it was more or less just like, hey, we're going to the seagrass spot so we can see the manatees. We didn't go there
Right.
for the grass. So,
Yeah.
but no, it's going to be really awesome to learn more about it
Yeah.
as we go through.
Cool. All right, what do you got for us, Gavin?
Yeah, so if you haven't been able to tell so far, it's going to be a very informal episode. So this past week, like I said, from Tuesday to Saturday was the annual meeting of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, or SVP, as I'm going to call it, because I don't want to say the whole name. It was in Cincinnati, Ohio, which I was kind of confused about at first, because I was like, why? Why there? And it turns out it's because there is a wonderful museum in Cincinnati. But first we're going to talk about presenting at conferences, and then I'm going to, like I said, break down some of the different talks or posters or things that I went to and learned about. So, yeah. So one of the most important things about giving a talk at a conference is when during the conference your talk is, as in like what day, because unfortunately mine was on the last day.
Oh, that's tough.
And by that point, usually a lot of people have left.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or they have learned too much knowledge in a short amount of time and are brain dead.
That's also a huge thing. I had to take a minute. I didn't go to too much on, I think, Thursday afternoon. So I got there like Tuesday night. Went to sort of the welcoming thing. The Cincinnati also has a really great zoo. If you've heard of Fiona the hippo.
I believe there's a more famous former resident of the Cincinnati Zoo.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about current residents.
Okay.
No, we can talk about Harambe, obviously.
I was like holding my breath.
Yep. Harambe famously is from the Cincinnati Zoo, but if you've heard of Fiona the hippo, she is also from the Cincinnati Zoo. But the director of the zoo, so like the head zookeeper, gave a talk about basically very informal. He basically just told a bunch of stories about how he used to pal around with Jane Goodall, which was actually pretty sick.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to listen to because she, however cool you think Jane Goodall is, at least just from these handful of stories and stuff that he told us, she's way cooler. But yeah, so I got there. That was at like 8:00 or something. So that was sort of the unofficial start of the conference. So I went to talks all day Wednesday and then Thursday morning. And then when you're giving a talk, you have to, at least this is how GSA, the Geological Society of America, usually does it, and this is how SVP did it as well. But it's the day before your talk, you give your talk, you have to take it on a flash drive to this place called the Speaker Ready Room. And they basically put all of the talks, the slideshows, onto a server that then each of the rooms has access to for pulling up all the talks. So you don't have to worry about different people signing into their Google Drive or their Apple, whatever the heck Apple calls their PowerPoint equivalent. But yeah, so that way it's all just sort of in one place on hardware. You don't have to worry about the internet cutting out as much. But yeah, so I had to have my talk in by end of day Friday, and so I, on top of just also being a little overwhelmed with knowledge by Thursday afternoon, I was like, well, I also need to finish my talk. So yep. You're always making last minute stuff, and that's actually one of the benefits of having it later in the in the conference is that you get to watch more talks and be like, that's a good idea. I should add a slide about that.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
like
I remember.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the last conference I went to, like I went into the room that I was presenting at the first day, and the screens had washed out all of the color. So you just could not see anything. And so immediately after that talk, I went and I darkened everything. 'Cause I was like, no,
Smart.
this will not happen. But yeah.
And there's always tech issues that happen. Like I went to one
Right.
talk that was about histology. So that's when you take, I think general histology is just any tissues. You take a tissue sample, put it under a microscope, and see what that tells you. In paleontology, that is almost exclusively taking slices of bone and putting that on a thin section, looking at it under a microscope. But typically, those talks have very pretty colors because you have to dye the different sections of the bone in order to be able to tell them apart. And so they normally use these like really vibrant purples and greens and stuff. But this one, some of her images just didn't show up, and that's like the focal point of this girl's talk. I felt so bad for her.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just the kind of stuff that can happen, when you're presenting at a conference. But sorry, I also talking a lot over the conference has made my voice pretty hoarse too.
Yeah.
That's something else. Is that you're not even if you're not even giving a talk, you're just talking constantly.
Yes.
Whether you're talking to people presenting posters, or just talking to different people that you're meeting, because you're all there, for the same purpose. So you all at least have a handful of things in common. So, yeah. So it's just my voice is real hoarse. So, but getting to that's a very fun pun because I presented quite a bit about horses. So got my talk done. So it was due by 4. I think I had my talk done at around 3:00.
Okay, so we're working right up into the last minute here.
Yeah, and it's just little things like, this figure could be laid out a little better. All the slides were in place. It was just a matter of like making things look kind of nicer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The substance wasn't going to change at that point.
No. And I mean, this was on my master's thesis, so the substance on this hasn't changed in the last 2 years. My talk was at a kind of a weird time because it's also kind of right before lunch, which is also not a terrific time for your talk to be. You don't want it to be right on either side of lunch because people are going to leave early for lunch and come back late.
Mm-hmm.
But there was still about 50 people or so in my room when I gave my talk, which was nice. I frankly didn't expect there to be that many. But I got up there and gave my talk and was way more nervous in the lead up than I should have been, frankly. I feel like that's just kind of the nature of giving talks, is that you're always psyching yourself out the whole time leading up to it. And then once you get up there, you're like, well, I'm here. Nothing I can do about it now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then so typically the general conference format is your talk is 10 to 12 minutes, followed by a few minutes for questions. You have a total of 15 minutes, including questions. That might vary a little bit from conference to conference, but that's usually in the ballpark.
No, that's right over here too.
Yeah. And so I finished with, and like the most important thing that everyone has always like shoved into my brain throughout my entire academic career is like, if you are giving a talk, the worst possible thing you can do is go over your time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Truly.
Because that throws the entire rest of the day off track.
And whatever you have to say is not that important. Like, I don't really care what the conference is.
Right. Yeah.
Either you're there for you, in which case you can do your whole thing. If it's a conference, it's Gavin Davidson's blah, blah, blah. Or if it's, what was the name of this conference?
Society of Vertebrate Paleontology.
Yeah, there was other people there. So, like, you never, like...
There sure was.
Right. It's like a commencement speech. Like you go up there, you do your 4 or 5 minutes, and you get off.
But yeah, so I finished mine with about 2.5 minutes left, and different places have it different ways. Some have just like 3 lights where it's green until 10 minutes, yellow from like 10 to 12, and then after 12 turns red. This one had a combo of that and just an actual digital clock. So I finished with about 2.5 minutes left, and I finished my talk and looked down and saw that, and I was like, did a little fist pump to myself, like, yeah.
Nice.
Because the first time I ran through it, I got to like 14 minutes, and I was only like 3/4 of the way through, and I just stopped. I'm like, yeah, I'm not even gonna finish this run. I gotta trim this down.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I got asked a couple of questions. One, unfortunately, so I had mentioned in like one slide that we have some a cat at the site, some cat specimens. Somebody asked me about that because I didn't talk about it for the rest of the thing. I was like, yeah, unfortunately, it's just like a single part of a cat jaw with like a single broken tooth in it. So it's like I couldn't even tell you what family or what like genus it's from. It's just a cat. That's all I could kind of tell. So he was a little disappointed. Because I was assuming that guy worked with cats.
Yeah.
But then somebody else somewhat corrected me. Which is always something you don't love to see. But he had asked me, so basically, if you remember, I'll put a link to the episode where I talk about my master's thesis in depth down in the show notes, but we did a whole episode about it. But basically the point of my thesis was taking all the fossils from this one particular site in South Dakota and comparing it to a bunch of other sites around the Great Plains and then a couple out west, just to see where my site fell in time relative to all those other ones. And you do that by sort of comparing what species you find where and which sites are more similar to one another. And so one of the sites, not even one of the important ones particularly, it was one of the West Coast ones, so we just threw those in as like a control. He had asked me, because that site, to my knowledge, is in Nevada, and he asked me about it, and I was like, I couldn't tell you where in Nevada. I think it's like western Nevada toward the Sierras. And he said, the only one of that name that I know is in California. And I was like, okay, thanks for the clarification. Because I'm like, what else do you say to that when you're in a room full of people up in front? Especially because being a relatively young, person in my career, and he was not like super senior, but older for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just a little awkward. But then I left. I talked to like 1 or 2 more people just as I was leaving, but then I had an 8-hour drive home. So then I left immediately, basically right after my talk. But yeah, so it was a really interesting experience. I'd presented posters before, but never a talk.
Cool.
And it was always something that I wanted to do, especially at this particular conference, just because it's like the paleontology conference. So ever since I was a little baby paleontologist and back in community college, I've been always like, yeah, I want to someday present at SVP. And and I did.
Yay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you had anything else to add about your experience giving talk at a conference. Like, so what conferences have you given presentations at?
Yeah, so I've only given one presentation. I did one poster too. But it was at the Benthic Ecology Society meeting, and it was in Miami.
Okay.
And I did that in the spring, and it was a really cool experience. It was my people, like you said, like is just the people that I shared a lot of interests with, and so it was really cool. I learned so much. I also was very socially exhausted.
Oh God, yeah.
I think I presented on. It was a 4-day conference, and I think I was on day 2 or 3, right in the morning. And
That's also pretty tough being early like that. That's
Yeah,
because then you just like haven't had time for
right.
coffee or anything yet.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I have mixed feelings about my presentation because the person that went before me was very nervous and anxious and kind
Mm.
of set the mood for the whole
Ah,
room. It just kind of made everyone feel a little reserved, I guess.
that's tough.
Yeah. And I decided that I wanted to start off my presentation by telling a joke. And so I told a really corny, uncomfortable joke
Go on.
about bivalves that did not get too many laughs, but I did it anyway.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to move on to my slides, and the clicker wasn't working. There was
Oh
like
no.
the stuff was not working, and I was like,
Oh boy.
That's the
ah.
worst.
Yep. So I probably wasted 2 minutes. Like the technical people trying to figure it out, they were like doing their stuff. And I'm like, man, I really wish I saved this joke for now. So yep. But then
Yeah.
it got all worked out. I still like nailed my presentation. I did it in the time I'd been like aiming for 12 minutes. It's just
Hmm.
like there wasn't any time for questions for me because of the
Interesting.
issues. Yeah.
So SVP, that happened a number of times, and especially if it happened like at the beginning, they would just say, "No, you can." They'd talk to, like, say to the person, who's actually running the timer, like, start it now. Um, which
Yeah.
was I thought was really nice, even though that does kind of mess up the rest of the day until the next break. Um, but that was at least really nice, especially for
Oh.
people whose like first talk it was, or first time at
Yeah.
the conference. Uh, but yeah, there was also a person who went in front of me who was presenting. I think it was his first presentation as well, but he was presenting, I think, the first chapter of his PhD.
Mm.
And so he was a bit more experienced, or had been in academia longer than me, but he was roughly our age. um but he said, toward the end, especially, like when people were asking him questions, which is by far the most nerve-wracking part, because the entire time, at least for me, leading up to it, I wasn't psyching myself out thinking that like I'm not going to do well in the talk, because I'm like, I know the material. I spent 2 years working on literally just this.
Mm-hmm.
uh what I was most nervous about is the questions,
You never know what someone's gonna say.
Hmm.
because there's always somebody there's always somebody who knows more about the thing, or at least equally about the thing as you do. And in my case, having just finished my master's, instead of having got a PhD and then working in the field for you know 20 years, yeah, there were lots of people in that room who knew more about paleontology, and even like my time period, and than I do. So it's like I am just the entire time crapping myself thinking that someone's just going to eviscerate me about something that I did wrong. And for the most part,
Mhm.
people are kind enough to not do that, but that's
Yeah.
always like the nightmare scenario.
See, I don't really fear that. I mean, like, I guess I know like it's always possible, but I try and trick myself into saying it's not probable.
and like that's definitely true.
Yeah.
People don't go to conferences just to dump on other people.
No.
Uh, but there's been a couple of times in mostly the GSA conferences. Well, I guess only the GSA conferences, because that's the only ones that I've been to other before this one. But there's been like one or two times where someone kind of is like goes up and kind of rips someone a new one. It's like a couple of times it is like a little warranted, because something that a lot of people probably don't realize is that when you're presenting at a conference, it's not peer reviewed. So
Right.
this isn't like publication. And so no one else really sees this before it goes out, which means that sometimes some kooky stuff can kind of slip through the cracks. And sometimes it is a little warranted to be like, your data does not mean what you think it means, and you're trying to make all these big inferences that you just can't make off of the data that you showed us here. For example, nobody really there was one talk that, like, if I knew just a little bit more, I probably would have been like, I'm going to call a little BS on this. But also he went his full 15 minutes and nobody could ask him questions. But it was about neonate pterosaurs. So that is like within the egg or extremely freshly hatched pterosaurs. I think he was proposing that these ones that he supposedly found were like still in the egg and just to the point of development where they, like, the bones were just starting to be kind of mineralized. So like really early on. And it's like, that is extremely rare to begin with, because fossil eggs are just exceedingly rare. And also fossil pterosaur eggs they're out there, but extremely, like, however uncommon fossil eggs are, pterosaur eggs basically just don't exist. And so he was making all these inferences and all these things and like labeling all these different bones and things on this still inside the egg fossilized pterosaur. And I was there. Several of my friends from grad school that I went to grad school with at the School of Mines were there as well. So I was with a couple of them during this talk, and we were just kind of looking at each other like, I don't think that is what he's saying it is. That just looks like a rock. That just looks like a rock to me. And he even like was talking about there's a particular foramen, which is a hole in bone for different blood vessels or nerves to pass through in the humerus, so your upper arm bone. And he was saying that not only could he see that on an animal whose upper arm bone is less than a millimeter long, but that it was filled in with like amniotic fluid, or like the equivalent of that of an egg. And that's really when I just looked at who was actually my roommate when I was in my second year of grad school, Grace, and we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, what? No, that's just like chemically not really possible. But
Yeah.
again, that kind of thing can happen, and I kind of wish somebody did. That's one where it would have been kind of warranted. But yeah, by and large, really roasting somebody after their talk doesn't really happen. But yeah, overall, positive, if not kind of stressful experience presenting the talk. But I'm really glad that I did it.
If somebody wanted to, like, they were in this field, or I imagine this would be applicable to other fields, like, how does one wind up giving one of these talks?
So you submit an abstract.
To who? To where?
To the conference. So
okay.
And this works both ways for talks and posters. It's a similar thing. You just check a box which one you want this to be for, or you can check both.
Mm-hmm.
So where it's like, if there's not a good talk session, because all the different sessions for the talks are themed, and they base the theme on what kinds of abstracts get submitted. So it's like, if you have one talk abstract that's just kind of really out in left field, not even like wacky and kooky like the pterosaur egg thing, but just like doesn't fit, then you can put that as a poster in a session that might make a little more sense for it. But yeah, so you just take the abstract of either, a paper you're working on, or in my case of my master's thesis, and you submit that, and you say, I would like this to be a talk, please. And in a couple months, they will, or, couple months, they will let you know if it got accepted or not. So it's like, somebody does look at the abstract before you go, basically just to be like, is this paleontology, number one, and
Mm-hmm.
is it vertebrate paleontology? And unless it's something that's like absolutely crazy, it's probably gonna get accepted for the most part. Um, but especially for a poster, the bar for posters is generally a little lower than for talks. But um, but yeah, nobody sees your poster. You don't submit your poster ahead of time. You just bring it with you and put it up when they tell you to. Nobody looks at your PowerPoint before you turn it in, or even like between when you turn it into that speaker ready room and when you go to give your talk. Nobody looks at it to check it or anything. So it's like sometimes some kooky stuff does come up at these conferences. But yeah, so unless Fia, you had any other thoughts about given talks, I have one last piece
Thoughts
of
about
advice, and then
giving
we'll turn
talks.
to. But yeah, that's the term, giving a talk.
And that was just thoughts about giving talks. That's a fun, like, it feels good to say that. It feels good in your mouth.
Yeah.
It does.
I don't have anything else to say.
Okay. Something you said earlier when you were talking about your jokes reminded me one last piece of advice. If you're ever giving a talk, I would say try to put in some kind of jokes of some kind, or keep it kind of lighter. It makes it much easier to sit through.
Right. That's
So
what I was
for
trying
example,
to do.
yeah. So how I started my talk, so the conference had an app that they used, a third-party app. Some conferences have their own app that they use every year. SVP has like a third-party one that they use that must do, the schedule for other conferences too. But so for mine, or for all the talks, it doesn't say the name of the presenter. It just says the title of the talk, the room, and the time. So if you were looking for Gavin Davidson's talk, you'd have to like search for Gavin Davidson and then it would come up. But otherwise, you just have to know the name of the talk.
Oh, that stinks.
Yeah. In like the printed out thing, I think it said that, but on the app, it doesn't unless you like click on it. Then it shows. But on the app, the title of my talk was wrong. And not just like a typo, it was like completely the wrong category.
Was it like an old draft of something, or was it like somebody else's
No.
talk?
It was somebody else's talk for sure. So my talk was in the session about Afrotheria, which are elephants, manatees, and some of their relatives, and mammalian macroevolution, which is sort of where mine fell. The session next door was about synapsids, which, if you remember, are the group of animals that mammals came from, but are still very reptile-looking. And this talk very clearly belonged in that session. And was a talk that I probably would have went to. Honestly, the title seemed cool. But so I made a little joke about that when I started my talk. It's just, again, keeping things light, making jokes and stuff. So I also made some jokes about that I did the research during 2020. So for some of my like statistical tests, they ran for 100,000 bootstrap resamples, which takes quite a while. And I was like, well, I didn't have anything better to do. So n equals 100,000. So just little stuff like that. It definitely makes your talk much better to sit through and sort of breaks up, especially if your talk is very data heavy. It breaks up a lot of that in ways that your audience will appreciate.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. So with that, let's get into some of the cool stuff that I learned.
Let's do it.
Let's see. I also got to meet several cool people that I'd like seen with or seen online, or like interacted with a little bit online. One of them was Yara Haridi, who, if you remember, very early on in the podcast, I believe episode 33, we did an episode about decolonizing paleontology, and we did that with Dr. Emma Dunn and Nasaiba Raja. Wonderful episode, still to this day one of my favorites.
Agreed.
And the person that I reached out to be the guest on that podcast initially was Yara Haridi. And she directed me to them because she was in the middle of her PhD and she was very busy. So yeah, so I got to talk to her for a little bit and just thanked her for sending us their way and making for a really great podcast episode. And so we, just chatted about life for a little bit. So that was really cool just to get to meet her. I've seen her everywhere online. Let's see. Some cool research, though. Placoderms. They are a group of fish. We've talked about them a handful of times, but they are armored in the front, where they have these really dense bone that's basically right at the surface of the skin, but then a very shark-like back half of the body that's made out of cartilage and doesn't really preserve very well. They were around quite a lot in the Devonian period, so in the ballpark of 400 to 360 million years ago is sort of when they were at their heyday. One of the first groups of fishes that had jaws, and also probably where teeth came from. But this presenter didn't talk about any of that cool jaws or teeth stuff. They proposed that they used their fins to stridulate. And if you're wondering what that means, you're probably not alone. So, stridulation is how crickets and grasshoppers make their chirping. It's basically when you take two things that are kind of Velcro-y, or at least very rigid, or like have actual ridges on them, and rub them on each other. The slipping from ridge to ridge makes that cricket sound or that grasshopper sound. And so looking at the joint between all these armored bones in the skull and the fins, it looked like there was some of those ridges sort of at the joint, so they could hypothetically rub their fins sort of on their body and make these sounds, which I thought initially was like, wow, that's really weird. But apparently there are a handful of catfish species today that do that.
Wow, I did not know that.
Huh.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah, and the oceans in general are very noisy places, way noisier than you would think. So being able to give off some kind of sound, just in general, whether it's to like scare a predator or to maybe even like have some kind of communication with one another, definitely not like out of the realm of possibility by any means. This talk also had wicked paleo art, really, really cool art in that talk.
Mm-hmm.
I unfortunately didn't get the name of almost anybody giving these talks. So there was a really interesting talk about the Cerrejón Formation down in northern South America, very famous for coal, a very coal-rich area, but also very famous for some fossil vertebrates, namely Titanoboa, which is up there with the largest or the largest.
Before, right?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
It is a roughly 40 to 45 foot long snake. It's basically a giant anaconda. So like from the movie Anaconda, roughly, give or take that size. But yeah, so it was about that. So it's a site that's very famous for its reptiles. It also has some big crocodilians. It has a gigantic turtle from this site. It's not that long after the dinosaurs go extinct. So there's lots of just funky stuff going on in the ecosystem. But what they were looking for was mammals. And so they were looking for these rocks that would preserve them differently. Reptiles and mammals have slightly different body chemistries and preserve slightly differently as fossils because of that. And what they ended up doing was, so this is not all that far from Bogota in Colombia, the capital, I believe, of Colombia. And they noticed that all of the roofs of like some of the really old buildings in Bogota have these nice red bricks, which are really characteristic, the red rocks of this time period that they were looking for these mammals. And so they were like, okay, there must be some red rocks of this type that we're looking for nearby. So they used the like archaeology and history of the city of Bogota to then figure out where they got the bricks from to then find their mammals, which they then did once they found the rocks.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Previously, if I were a better host, I would have looked up what episode number this was. But in the past, we've talked about the Great American Biotic Interchange. That is when about 2.5 to 3 million years ago, North America and South America joined up after being apart for a very long time. And in that episode, we mostly talked in the latter half of the episode about how all the stuff from North America just totally dunked on all the stuff in South America. And there was a talk that really showed some very convincing data that this was not the case. That the stuff in South America was already, if not gone, very much in decline by the time the North American stuff got there. So it's not that the stuff from North America came down and took out the stuff native to South America. They suggested that it was more that they came down and filled some spaces that were already empty. They just came and found some empty apartments and were like, hey, I could live here, and then did.
That's cool.
In the past on this podcast, we've remarked several times about how camels suck, mostly because of their taxonomy.
We've gotten yelled at for this.
We sure have. And I actually saw Darren, my grad school advisor, who was the one that yelled at us. He came and he presented a poster and or no, he gave a talk. Yeah, I don't think he had a poster. So I got to see him for a little bit. That was cool. But so their taxonomy and their phylogeny, so how they're all related to one another, is really hard to figure out because they're very convergent with one another. And so I titled this section in my notes that I was taking, "Someone May Have Solved Camels?" ? Specifically, they were using some skull bones surrounding the ears. So if you feel like at the back of your skull, behind your ear, there's kind of like a little bulb of bone. The hard part, like sort of right behind your jaw. Mm-hmm. That's what they were looking at for this. And they got about halfway through the talk, and then they showed one of their cladograms, so how their different species are related to one another. And then my next bullet just says, LOL, JK. This method apparently works for some of the more derived ones, so the ones that are, more quote-unquote advanced. But the basal ones are still kind of junk that did not get resolved all that well. So they may have found something useful for camels, but not solved camels.
Darn.
Yeah. There was also, speaking of Darren's talk, he gave a very interesting, there's a whole session dedicated to just methods of doing things, specifically like preparation. So it's roughly understood that for every hour you spend getting a fossil out of the ground in the field, you spend 10 to 12 hours working on it back in the lab. As in just taking all the rock off of it. Not even like doing the research, studying it, but just getting it ready to study. So there's a whole session dedicated to best practices and things for doing that. And Darren gave a talk about somebody who, he was an undergrad at the School of Mines when I was there. We didn't overlap in like grad school at all while I was there. But that student couldn't make it. So Darren gave the talk instead. Basically, how you get a fossil, especially a big one, back to the lab from the field is you sort of make it an island. So you dig sort of a trench around it. And then you take, the traditional method is you take plaster, different kinds of plaster, but more or less the kind that you would use for like paper mache. And you sort of paint that over the top of the fossil. Usually you put some kind of interference layer so you're not just painting it right on the fossil, but that can be done too. Then you put on burlap, which you soak in the plaster, sort of like, then you basically just do paper mache at that point, but using burlap instead of paper. And then you sort of, because you now have it sort of on an island, then you then sort of dig underneath it and then flip it over and then do the same plaster on the other side. But what this guy, his name is Anthony Gordon. I actually know his name, so I'll give him the credit. He basically became like a mini mechanical engineer, studying all the different mechanical properties of different ways to do this better, because sometimes the burlap just fails. And when it does, you lose that entire jacket, is what the plaster is called. It's called a jacket. When the burlap fails, it doesn't just like fail a little bit, it fails totally. And so they were trying to find a way to be like, okay, is there something maybe more sturdy? Or if it's not more sturdy, at least fails less catastrophically. And so They tested a whole bunch of different materials. The School of Mines, being also a very strong engineering school, had all the different materials testing equipment and came up with a new way to, make jackets, which is one of the most fundamental parts of doing paleontology. So I thought that was really, really cool. So yeah, just wanted to give this, School of Mines another shout out for that. And then to end off here, I think my favorite talk that I went to was from, I believe it was someone at Museum of the Rockies, doing a study on Oviraptor relatives. So that's the dinosaur that's famous for quote unquote eating eggs, even though now we know that it was just a good parent and that those were actually its eggs that it was sitting on top of and guarding. When the animal died, but when we first found it, we thought, oh, this is a sneaky carnivorous dinosaur. It must be eating the eggs, but no, it's just a good parent.
That's cool.
Yeah, so we've known that for quite a while, but what this study was basically seeing how much energy, because they built also very complicated nests, where the eggs were sort of buried or partially buried, which partial burial isn't something pretty much anything does today. Like crocodilians fully bury their eggs. Birds don't bury their eggs at all, save for like a species or two. So they had very unique and highly organized eggs. So basically, to simulate the parent sitting on top of it, they basically took a bunch of emu eggs and hollowed them out, put a bunch of temperature sensors in them, and monitored how much heat was used to sort of heat the nest, having the eggs in different configurations. And they basically took just a giant tub of water to substitute for the body mass of the parent. And then basically also went to see, if they tucked their legs underneath them in the nest, would that have helped? So they took some just tubing and pumped hot water through it. The diagrams that they used and the system for it looked like it was so much work.
Yeah.
But it was a really neat study that showed it really is not unreasonable the amount of, because they also measured how much heat energy they put into the water and how much of that was then transferred into the eggs. So they were it's definitely not an unreasonable amount of heat that these things put off to put their eggs at this rough temperature, which they know partially what temperature the eggs would have been at from some isotope stuff from the eggshells. So it's to get them to this temperature, they easily could have done it just by sitting on them. So once that fully comes out and gets published, I think that's going to be one of the more definitive things of these dinosaurs were warm-blooded, sat on their nests, and we have actual data to prove it. But yeah, with that, our website that we used to record is telling me that I got 2 minutes left. So that is the Society of Vertebrate. It sure is. That's the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology 2023 meeting. Really cool, really neat to have the chance. I also just want to give a shout out to my department here at Bucknell. Something I made sure to talk about in my talk in the acknowledgments was that the university itself does not provide funds for staff to go to conferences. I think they give us $250 a year for professional development, which is not nearly enough to go to a conference.
Yeah.
But the department was if this is something you really want to do that is really important to you and for you to be happy here, we have no problem, fronting the bill for that. So big shout out to my department here.
And shout out to all of you for listening to episode 123 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike. That was Gavin. Fia joined us back this week, and we hope to see all of you guys back here in 2 weeks. Until then, take care, everybody.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Fenella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.